Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Julianne Williams, and I'm a technical officer with the World Health Organization in their European Office for the Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases. And I'm very happy to be here today to be talking about nutrition and health in Europe and the critical role of the first 1,000 days. I was going to start by giving a bit of background information coming from the perspective of the World Health Organization, but also very happy that we have other organizations here to also talk about this, from UNICEF and Save the Children. I was going to briefly review the recommendations about breastfeeding and young child feeding, and then I was going to briefly review the current situation in Europe. So breastfeeding and the appropriate feeding of infants and young children is a cornerstone of WHO policy. It's a key part of our Ending Child Obesity initiative. It's part of the European policy framework, Health 2020. You'll see it mentioned many times in the European Food and Nutrition Action Plan, which sets out the priority actions for member states of the World Health Organization for the next 5 years related to promoting nutrition and health. And it's also a key part of the Sustainable Development Goals. So here I've listed the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and these are the 17 indicators that sort of set the agenda for the UN for the next 15 years. And here I've put in the middle good health and well-being, because breastfeeding and child feeding is such a key part of this goal, but you'll see that these indicators are all related to each other. You can't have one without the other often. So in 2014, the Food and Agriculture Organization and the WHO had a conference on nutrition, and they had something called the Rome Declaration. And the aim of this was to address malnutrition in all its forms. So both overnutrition, problems like obesity and overweight, but also problems like undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies. And paradoxically, sometimes you can see both conditions in the same person, in the same households. You'll see here that protecting, promoting, and supporting breastfeeding was a key action that was affirmed at this Rome Declaration. And more recently, this year, there was the 71st World Health Assembly on infant and young child feeding. And this was another affirmation of the importance of breastfeeding and appropriate infant-child feeding. Here we saw a call to increase investment and support for breastfeeding, to reinvigorate the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative, which was a joint initiative started by WHO and UNICEF in the 1980s, and I hope we hear more about this later. There was a call to strengthen national implementation of the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, which I also hope some of our colleagues will tell us more about later, and promoting timely and adequate complementary feeding. So by complementary feeding, we mean when we start feeding infants food after breastfeeding. So the WHO recommendations are exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months of life. And thereafter, there's nutritionally adequate and safe complementary foods and continued breastfeeding for up to 2 years and beyond. And this is something that has been affirmed and a goal that we've tried to emphasize in many World Health Assembly initiatives. And why? Why do we recommend breastfeeding for infants? It's a cornerstone of child survival and child health, both in developed and developing countries. So it's essential, irreplaceable nutrition. There's no alternative to breast milk that gives the same benefits. And it can protect children from infectious diseases, so respiratory infections, diarrheal diseases, other potentially life-threatening ailments. But it can also protect infants from other diseases like non-communicable diseases. So I work in the area of non-communicable diseases. And by that we mean things like cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, respiratory diseases. And what we found is that breastfeeding can be protective against these conditions as well. One of the initiatives that my group does is the childhood growth. It's called COSI, the Child Obesity Surveillance Initiative. And this, along with many other studies, has shown that breastfeeding can be protective against obesity later. So how are we doing? This shows exclusive breastfeeding rates at 6 months in the various World Health Organization regions. You can see that the Euro region is circled there, and there, as you can see, are some areas for improvement. We, of the WHO regions, we're doing the worst. One of the projects that my group has recently looked at is maternal nutrition. And in this, we looked at exclusive breastfeeding by country. And you can see there, Italy has been circled. Again, there's some opportunities for improving exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months. And the head of my office, Dr. João Breda, couldn't be here today. He really wanted to be. But one of the papers that he published gave some other numbers from national surveys. And here you see again, Italy is there on kind of the lower range of exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months. And here, this is the rates of breastfeeding initiation. So one of the recommendations that we have is to initiate breastfeeding within an hour of birth. And you'll see that there's a lot of variation between countries in terms of the countries that are doing it. Unfortunately, there's no data from Italy here. One of the important initiatives that can help improve breastfeeding rates is something called the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative. And here I've cited a randomized controlled trial which shows that the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative works. So in in hospitals where the 10 baby-friendly hospital initiative steps are being implemented, you see an almost 7-fold increase in the percentage of babies that are exclusively breastfed. So this is a very important initiative. In terms of recommendations for complementary feeding, the guideline is to introduce complementary foods at 6 months of age, so 180 days, while continuing to breastfeed. And there's been some expert consultation on this, and the conclusion was that the potential benefits of waiting until the baby is 6 months outweigh any potential risks associated with waiting. And trained health workers play a really essential role in ensuring that babies are exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months. I am a new mother. I have a baby at home. He's 8 months. And I was confused as a new mother. You're suddenly in this role that's unfamiliar. And I was in the store, and I was really surprised to see follow-up formula. And even working at the World Health Organization, I had to go ask my colleagues, what is follow-up formula? Why do I need follow-up formula? Follow-up formula is not necessary. And this was something that was established back in the 80s, but it continues to cause a lot of confusion to consumers. And unfortunately, there's a lot of marketing for these follow-up formulas, and there's a direct correlation between the marketing strategies that companies are having for these follow-up formula. So formula that you give your baby supposedly after you stop breastfeeding, and subsequent use of breast milk substitutes. And unfortunately, it can be introduced early, and it can undermine exclusive breastfeeding up to 6 months of age, and sustain breastfeeding for 2 years, which is what we recommend. And this issue is one reason that regulation is so important. And again, this has been established in many World Health Assembly resolutions, and there's a call for countries for member states to try to comply fully with their responsibilities under what's called the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes and subsequent relevant World Health Assembly resolutions. So effective approaches for limiting this inappropriate marketing of breast milk substitutes have been outlined. Some of the approaches include national or regional legislation that incorporates provisions of what they summarize as the code. Increasing knowledge of the code to healthcare providers is very important. As always, monitoring and enforcing effective sanctions if there are violations, and engaging in partnerships with countries to help governments enact, implement, enforce, and monitor the code. So in summary, breastfeeding is one of the most effective ways to ensure health through the life course. And the WHO recommends that we initiate breastfeeding within 1 hour of birth, and that infants should be exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months of life, and thereafter receive nutritionally adequate and safe complementary foods. And breastfeeding should continue for up to 2 years or beyond. The Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative is an effective way to improve breastfeeding outcomes, and restrictions are needed on marketing of breast milk substitutes. So thank you very much.